Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this Monday night, February 13th in-depth ag forecast brought to you by Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, I flew into Fargo this afternoon and grabbed a quick picture out of the plane window here as we were approaching the runway. And it's just it's a beautiful landscape. There's a great amount of snow on the ground right now for this time of year. And I'll be honest, the Northern Plains, I know you don't often think of this as a destination for winter, but it is beautiful up here. And I just wanted to show you a quick picture of what that looked like. Now you can see the clear skies. So as we were coming in tonight, take a look. This is what just before the sunset things look like. Now, we are watching a couple of very important systems moving across the country this week. There's a deep low coming out here and another large one that's coming in to the Pacific Northwest, is going to dive pretty far to the south as well and eject out of Colorado. But we did get to see under some of the light cloud cover that was across the plains where the snowpack is. And I found it kind of interesting here. You can kind of see where the snow is lined up right in through this area, okay? And there are some places that just don't have snow on the ground. And we're going to talk about snow in the west at the end of this video, so sit tight for that. But I want you to see this area right here because this afternoon's temperature pattern reflected that. This large area of ground that doesn't have any snow on it was much warmer than the surrounding area simply because of the presence of that snowpack. This was a map at 6:30 p.m. this evening, just after I landed, and you can see it was a very, very mild day for a lot of people across the United States. Now, since we were talking about snow, I did want to go back and look at our snowfall departure from normal map. And there's just a couple of important things to point out here. There are a lot of people throughout the Midwest that still have yet to see a big snowfall event this particular year. This second low that does come out here later this week is going to run right across this area, and that could put down some pretty good snow for some places that really need it. The biggest problem, of course, this year has been the lack of snow throughout much of the Northeast. And again, we saw another system over the weekend that came out of Louisiana and then ran up to North Carolina and exited. So what we've not been able to do is build a large area of high pressure that sits right here over like Ontario or Quebec at the same time when a trough can kind of dive in with a little bit of negative tilt to it. That's what gives us those big nor'easters. We've just not seen that pattern at all. And that is why we're running some very large snowfall deficits here across parts of the Northeast. What doesn't help with that is the presence of that large subtropical ridge. We keep talking about it sitting here, and it's kind of it's almost like a deflector. It's just keeping systems away from diving and digging across the eastern half of the country. So here it is. This would be the January 1st to February 13th average temperature ranks by climate district. And we could very easily see how quite mild it's been in the eastern half of the United States overall. Also interesting just to note, it's been a mild go of it in the Canadian Prairie, and take a look at this climate reporting district in Montana, 9th warmest on record for January. This is all going to change in a big way here as we approach the end of this month, and we're going to talk about it very soon here, especially for the Canadian Prairie and Northern Plains, but I don't think so for parts of New England. Now, just thinking about that, I also wanted to take you a quick trip across the Atlantic, and let's go over and see Europe, because for the last 45 days, much of Europe, from Central Europe to Eastern Europe and most of this part of Russia and Scandinavia has been quite mild as well, whereas parts of France and Spain have seen some cooler temperatures. And that really just kind of makes me think and wonder about what snowpack looks like here. So maybe I'll put some labels over this so it's a bit easier to see. There we go. So what you're looking at here, of course, would be the Alps. And I'm just trying to assess what snowpack looks like because this is very important for spring runoff and water levels. And so we always have to think about what Europe is going to experience in terms of drought. So something to look at here. This was for the month of January, so this is updated once a month. This is from Rutgers University Global Snow Lab. Great resource here. And what they did was they put together a graphic of departures on the negative side and on the positive side in terms of snow. And so again, this is percent. And just notice much of Europe and at the same time, much of the Midwest and New England. So it's just a great, it's kind of a metric just to show us who's been very mild this winter. And that's a telltale sign of what this pattern has done. Just want to show you one other thing. I got some questions about drought there. So this would be the 3-month standard precipitation index map from the Climate Prediction Center. It's on the USDA's website. You can see that much of Eastern Europe, though, has been wet. So in and around Romania, for example, this whole area. This is Ukraine, by the way. So right in through here have been quite wet. But there are pockets through Western Europe that have been drier. So we just need to keep kind of our mind thinking about that going into spring. From here, I do want to show you a month ago what the 40-inch or 100 centimeter soil moisture looked like, because we've been having this ongoing discussion about the drought that is still down there deep in the soil at 40 inches from the fall 2022, very, very dry time period in September and October. So in December, still here at its peak, but I'd like to show you how much it's changed. So in the last 2 months, this is how much it's improved. So again, December, and this is the latest February 13th update. Now, we've been extremely wet in parts of the Mid-South and across the South and Southeast, and we're going to have to keep talking about this area continuing to be quite wet. But to be honest, for a lot of you that watch the video here in the Midwest and the Plains, this particular map and its evolution over the next, I'll call it 75 days, is going to be critical to the success of the 2022 growing season. This must be revived by spring rains before we get into the fields for our spring planting. And we're going to have to watch that very, very carefully. Now, let's come back to the stuff we got going on right now before I sneak out again and do a little bit of a longer range. We've got a very active National Weather Service all hazards weather map. And a lot of the colors you see like in through here or in this part of New Mexico and Texas or down here in California, throughout Nevada, Arizona, this is all wind. Very, very strong winds. We have freeze warnings in the San Joaquin Valley. We've got a freeze watch that's right here along the coast of California. Winter storm warnings on the nose of a big area of high pressure pushing in through here, putting up some decent snows into the Rockies. The Sierra Nevada is not getting any of this, all right, but the Cascades are. So we're going to take a quicker look at the end of this on what it would take to really just pummel the West Coast with snow going into March. I'll come back to that. But this very potent system that's coming out here has got a large area under high wind advisories, and there's winter storm watches that stretch from New Mexico and Colorado through Kansas. Yes, there is good moisture coming into Kansas with this, and I'm getting kind of worried because I need to get home tomorrow on Tuesday, and it looks as though we're still going to be seeing some snow and some strong winds here in the Red River Valley of the North. So let's go look at it. Here are the two waves we're watching. This is the lead wave, and here's the second wave, and this one's going to dig in behind it while this one ejects quickly toward the Great Lakes. You can see they're kind of stacked up here in the Pacific. They're all being delivered in this direction, and there's always this ridge that's sitting down here that's kind of kicking systems on and off. That's been the pattern for a while, but by tomorrow on Valentine's Day, we're looking at very windy conditions through a broad part of the United States here, all the way from much of the Intermountain West in California through the Southwest coming out of Texas. I mean, this broad area of very, very strong winds. On one side of it, it's going to be pulling in a lot of warmth. On the back side of it, I'm actually getting quite concerned here about the risk of maybe we might even see a blizzard warning released. I'm going to kind of explain why I think that might be the case in the northern plains. So here it is. High-res NAM 18Z. Let's start this off this evening on Monday. I'm going to play this through the overnight hours. So the trailing wave is here. High pressure is pushing into Montana, and there's a low that's emerging from New Mexico into Texas. Those are our three pieces here. The East Coast has got high pressure. So the system through 6 a.m. Tuesday, working our way through midday Tuesday. Do you see the high pressure cell pushing in? That's the snow prompting the winter storm warnings. This is the snow coming through western North Dakota and eastern Montana. And then again, the wave behind it is already down here, ready to emerge in Colorado on Wednesday. So broad shield of rain out ahead of this. Primary reason for that is there is just a lot of very warm air that's out ahead of this. In fact, you wait till you see these temperatures at the end of this video. Very mild here. But we're going to be watching throughout the day. There might be a narrow band of some ice due to some overrunning here. But on the back side, we're going to see some snow. Now, why I suggested there might be a blizzard warning that comes out tomorrow is because look at the spacing of these isobars in here. That's going to indicate some very strong winds. And remember, there's no snow depth criteria. It just has to be snowing. And it'll certainly meet that 3-hour criteria. So it means if we got winds over 35 miles an hour and we have snow falling and we've got reduced visibilities down to a quarter mile or less, that's all it takes in this area. Now remember, scattered showers and storms on the warm sector side of this through this area, and this is 11 p.m. Tuesday. And as that goes into the Great Lakes and through parts of Ontario into Quebec, the next one emerges out of Colorado and New Mexico. And this is the guy that I'm going to be watching carefully because it's spreading snow. I'm just rocking back and forth here. This would be midday Wednesday all the way until Wednesday night. And that's got snow for Colorado, Kansas, maybe the panhandles here. And then it is going to really start to shape up into a decent cyclone that could put down its heaviest snow swath right in through here. This is a textbook Colorado low. And of course, on the southern side of it, we're going to have to be talking about the risk for some severe weather. Now, real quick before we come back to that, I do want to show you this is the probability of getting at least 4 inches through the next 72 hours. So we've got system number 1 right in through here. System number 2 dives. That's coming out right there. And this would be the high pressure cell pushing up against the Rocky Mountains. So this is the probability of getting 4 inches. Let's step it up to 8. And let's go ahead and step this up to 12, just so you can all kind of pick out your region and see what the forecast is holding here. All right. Now from here, what I want to do is I want to tell you why I think we might see that blizzard warning go out. Because over the next 72 hours in the Red River Valley of the North, the National Digital Forecast Database does suggest 30 to 50 plus mile an hour wind gusts in this area. So I might be spending an extra day or two here. If anybody's around and wants to have dinner, if I get stuck, let's do it. I mean, it's going to be a very windy go of it here around the Red River Valley of the North. Okay, from there, let's talk about the southern side of the second system. This is now the outlook for day 3, which would be Wednesday. So right now, as that second system comes out into Colorado on the southern side of it from this part of the Red River Valley through the Mississippi Valley, we do have a slight risk. This has been an extremely challenging forecast to try to figure out if all of the ingredients, the shear, the instability, the moisture, were going to be all timed well. The fact that this second wave is more open, means we're not going to have that tight focal area of major severe weather. But I do want to show you that in the day 4 outlook, so this would be on Thursday, there will be a broad open warm sector, which means all the way from the south down here in Mississippi, Alabama, all the way to possibly Lake Erie could see some of those stronger storms rolling through. Now, bigger picture, this is your next 10 days. So we've got high pressure now. We've got system number 1, system number 2, and subtropical ridge. So what I'm really looking for in this is who's not getting the precipitation. And the latest models put a pretty hard line south of that things are going to be relatively dry. And we're going to have to wait a while longer before we see the Pacific Northwest and California picking up on the precip. There's then this region that is going to be drier in the Canadian Prairie. So there's several pieces to this pattern where you kind of got that haves and have-nots look to it. So why don't we go in and just take a look at what these waves are going to do here. Now, this is the lead wave, the one that's coming out on Valentine's Day that goes right toward the Great Lakes. The second wave behind it, you see how open this wave is and see how it's got a bit of a positive tilt to it? This is what's really making this severe weather forecast for the south very challenging on Wednesday getting into Thursday. But you know what's a mainstay in this pattern? This right here. That's that subtropical ridge. So every one of these systems dives and then just checks off toward the Great Lakes. And that's what's keeping parts of the southeast drier. And that's what's keeping things mild overall. And I can play this all the way out there to the next big system, which we're thinking about next Wednesday. That's another big one. We have a lot of things to be thinking about with this. It's not yet fully formed, but it's going to do the same thing because here it is again. Big subtropical ridge is still firmly planted. So let's do our multi-model analysis, kind of see how it all unfolds. I'm going to play quickly through the next 42 to 48 hours. So that gets us through the system we've already analyzed. That's the one that produces the snow like in the north here. Now, system number 2, this is what I want to take a closer look at. The models are in good agreement Wednesday. This is Wednesday evening, getting into the overnight hours of Thursday morning. They're both putting down snow in relatively the same position. And remember, to the south of this is where we're going to be watching for the strong to severe storms on Wednesday night into Thursday morning. And then Thursday during the day, we're going to see if this whole sector opens up for the risk of some storms, possibly more severe the farther south you go. Now from there, this is Thursday night. So again, a lot of strong to severe storms right here. It's in the GFS, it's in the Euro. But what did it do? It pulled that snow through Kansas into parts of northern Missouri, Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Both models, same ideas here. I like this. But too mild up the East Coast. So we don't see that snow here. This is now getting out there to Friday morning at 6 a.m. Friday at noon, spreads through the right here through the Mid-Atlantic and the Carolinas, and then it's out. Now behind that, there's a little clipper that runs through the northern part of the Canadian Prairie. It's in both models. I'm really impressed with their agreement here. And we do have this cutoff low that's way offshore in California. But this is going to be the big shift in the pattern. There's a large area of high pressure. I'm just kind of putting an arrow on the southern side of it that begins to just push its way south by the 19th, getting into the 20th. And you can see the nose of that just pushing more snow here into Montana. Again, this is just upslope flow due to colder air. And this is going to be the system I'm going to have to watch very carefully because it is a full 9 or 10 days out. But you remember that last time when we saw all of that cold air advance to the south, but there was a subtropical ridge, we developed an ice storm. And I think that this go of it may see again parts of Texas, Oklahoma, maybe now stretching up into Illinois, having the risk for some ice with some snow on the backside. But what you notice here is that I'm talking about activity. And I've been so worried about this underlying drought issue. And we do see multiple storm systems, including at the very end, more systems pouring into the northwest. And we're going to come back to that in a few seconds. So this is all a very good narrative for the water health of the country. It's just going to be too much, I think, in an area right down here. So let's go have a look at all of this. How about the snow side of it? I'm just going to play out for you the 12Z European model. We're going to go all the way out there a week. And you're kind of watching this unfold through this weekend. And I'm going to pause it right there. That's 6 a.m. Monday. So nose of the front, first system, second system. That's the total snow. GFS, same time period. There it is. So Euro, GFS. That's pretty good model agreement. At the end of this time period, better snows in the Northern Rockies, better snows into the Cascades. When does it come back to California? That's a question we're going to answer in a few moments. But I do want to give you some probabilities. This is the chance of getting at least 3 inches in the next 10 days. Here's the chance for 6. If we step this up to 12, now we see it primarily limited to the Rockies, parts of Ontario, Quebec, but there is, I know it's small, but with that swipe in through there, we could get some heavier snow. Just be on the lookout for that. From here, let's talk about the wet side of this. This is the probability of getting at least an inch of liquid over the next 10 days. So this is very good for the drought issues still underlying the soil here. And this is good for the eastern Corn Belt. But the Tennessee Valley into the northern part of the southeast here, there's a lot of rainfall coming into this particular area. Now, what about week 2? During week 2, starting off here on the 23rd and playing forward, I see a lot of the same old thing, except we start to see the coldest air in the troposphere sitting here. So that's going to give us a contrast between this ridging event and that ridging event, this trough, and the flow is going to scream through the middle of this. What's good about this? That returns moisture to the northwest, possibly to California. This is going to build up more snowpack in the Intermountain West, and it's going to give more activity rolling through with these systems all around that subtropical ridge. That's what week 2 looks like. You know, we have that saying, right? March comes in like a lion, out like a lamb. Well, I think February is going to end like a lion. I think it's just going to be sticking around for the beginning of March because the GFS is in agreement with this. This is the GFS week 2 pattern, very similar. Now, thinking about the West, I want to just give you the latest updates on the NRCS snow water equivalent. And this is all remnant of what happened in early January, all right? Upper Colorado Basin. In fact, I was just looking, I got it right here in front of me. The USA Today had an article about Lake Mead and Lake Powell having a discussion here, but nowhere in the article was it mentioned that right now on the basin, there's 120 to 130% of normal snowpack in the upper Colorado. And that's all going to come down here to Lake Mead and Lake Powell. So we need to watch this because there's a lot of snowpack in here. This is where I want to see it more. We need to have much, much more into this area. So let's think about this. I went out and looked for the whole western region, and I wanted to go back to 1895 and just look at March precip. Whenever we have less than adequate precip across the West, a lot of folks start talking about what we call the Miracle March. It's where all of a sudden this big push comes in at the very end. So I took the data and I said, show me those really, really wet marches for the whole West. And I lined them all up, and I got some of the wettest years. So there's years like this, like 1983 or 1991 or 1995, 2011. But look at this. The last 2 years, no Miracle Marches. Very, very dry compared to the historical average. So if you stitch all together those really, really wet marches, I don't think there's any surprise here. certainly helps to have a deep trough just off the coast. You say, well, what's going on here? Well, the flow's coming around and hitting like this. There's a subtropical jet coming in like that. And it's all running over the top of a big ridge that's over the northeast. That's the ideal setup. Now, what I have to ask is what gets us there? What helps this all happen? What helps the Pacific jet pick up that momentum and get there? And when it comes to the tropics, it's not a La Nina thing. It's not. You can look at the correlation. It's not. It's an MJO thing. We need to see the MJO spending quite a bit of time over like phases 4 and 5. We need to see it even at times starting to push a lot of rising motion here. And this is really kind of around but north of Hawaii. This is the area to be watching. So what I want to say is, you noticed in that week 2 forecast, there it is. We're starting to see better moisture. Part of that is because when you get out there, we're seeing better rising motion in this area. And that's starting to translate into maybe better chances at breaking down these huge ridges that have been in the Gulf of Alaska. Because I'll tell you, if we are able to see the MJO come back over to phase 3, that's the Indian Ocean, the momentum begins to pick up right here. It also sends systems quickly through the United States, and then they run up over a big ridge in the Atlantic. Well, what if it comes into phase 4? That starts to get into some serious business for the West. Deep trough here, that's it. Southeastern ridge, this is a possibility. What if we go over to phase 5? This is probably the most active because you can see that similar setup, strong flow coming around a trough. Phase 3, 4, and 5, they're all Miracle March setups. Now, right now, the MJO seems to be sitting here. But I think this is a bit of a phantom look to it. I was not convinced of this last Thursday, but now I'm starting to think that we're not really seeing the true position of the rising motion. Now let me explain to you what I'm talking about. Do you see how fast the MJO went through phase 4 and 5 and 6? That's too fast. There must be some sort of like convectively coupled wave or something shoving this quickly across Australia. Maybe it was the result of the big tropical cyclone that was going toward New Zealand that made this look like it does. But I actually think we're going to see the MJO not stay long here, but possibly reemerge back in the Indian Ocean. Now, I'm trying not to confirm my own biases. I'm trying not to be a hammer that only sees nails. But when I think about what this is possibly doing, I'm going to go back and look at where those velocity potentials are going back negative. So right now, they're negative over phases 3 and 4. Excuse me. They're positive. I want them to be negative. That would indicate rising motion right in this area. See that? So it could appear that at the end of February, we do see more MJO phase 4, 5, 6, which could be a major assist in getting moisture back into the West to finish off this wet season. So that's what you need to be watching with me, okay? So let's do that. From here, let's finish this up with a quick long-term outlook. The new European weeklies for the time period of February 25th to March 25th made a slight adjustment. They're a bit drier along the Gulf Coast, and they're much wetter here along the whole of the West. Even though you're saying, well, it's still dry in California, it's actually wetter than the previous run. In fact, just to show it to you, this was the previous run. So the newest run has now got more of that idea that systems are going to be coming in and ejecting. So this is going to continue about, if you're east of the 95th meridian, we're going to see a lot of systems rolling through here. Could we be drier along the Gulf Coast? That all is going to depend on the size of that subtropical ridge. But certainly through this area that's been wet, we're going to continue to see it. Now, the temperature pattern changes were interesting because the previous run was very aggressive on seeing more cold air farther to the south. Now it's keeping it more in the Canadian Prairie Northern Plains and throughout the Intermountain West where there's a lot of snowpack. And I think the models are having a bit of a difficult time dealing with the fact that there is a polar vortex displacement right now. So if you just get yourself oriented, here's North America. Polar vortex normally sits here. It's sitting over Scandinavia right now. And for the next 15 days, it's going to be somewhere kind of wobbling around over here. You've got to get it to have a tropospheric reflection. It's got to connect with the troposphere. And at this point, I don't really see that happening. Now, let's talk about these temperatures. We already know Monday was mild. We go into Tuesday, still mild in the eastern 2/3 of the United States. Wednesday, this is when the big system's coming out of Colorado. Large warm sector opens up. This is where the severe weather threat's going to be on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, Still the warm sector sits here. We're going to watch it. But look at the contrast. This is behind the big system on Thursday. Getting into Friday, that's our colder day for a bigger section of the country. And this goes right back on Saturday to Sunday to mild conditions. So these shots of colder air are fleeting. But it's this 15-day pattern that I'm watching carefully. Because if the polar vortex was going to link up with that big stratospheric warming event that's happening over the Arctic right now, we would expect to see a big displacement coming through Canada and advancing all the way into, the southern United States. And as far out there as I can go, yes, the cold air is advancing. It's going to get into the Canadian Prairie, the Northwest. It's going to get into Montana, the Northern Plains. I just think that subtropical ridge is a formidable foe, and it's going to be a hard thing to get out of the way. So what happens? If there's a trough here of cold air and there's warmth here, the jet stream goes right in between the two, setting up a very active pattern where I made that long arrow. That's kind of what we're looking at for the longer term here. Overall, this particular pattern is one that's going to be one I think that's going to set us up for a very active severe weather this spring, severe weather season. From the southern plains through the mid-south, up into the Midwest, and into the Southeast. It's going to be a very active severe weather season because of seeing stuff like this. So let's keep an eye on this pattern. All right, last couple things I want to tell you. In Thursday's in-depth video, we're going to have a much deeper discussion about this La Nina. I've been putting in reports. We talked about it last time. It's still fading because right now I think the most important animation to be watching is this one right here. Let's refresh this and let it get going again. This is depth, and this is the Western Pacific and the Eastern Pacific. And that warm water is beginning to make its advance back to the east. And therefore, we could very quickly see, because these trade winds have just backed off, a quick INSO-neutral time period. And maybe by late summer, we're talking about El Nino behavior. And that's going to have a huge implication on next summer, next fall, and certainly next winter. Before we get there, though, I want to figure out one last thing today, and it's about South America. I got a lot of questions today via email about Rio Grande do Sul. We know that much of Brazil is having a big crop year, plenty of rain in certain places. But if you'd like to go at any time see what the precipitation is, just go to the USDA FAS website. And what you can do here is you can click on any of these locations. I'm going to go to Brazil. And what I want to do when I get here is I want to show you, let's just go over to, we can go over to any of these particular graphics, but let's just stay here on the NDVI and then click on any given Brazilian state. I'll click on Rio Grande do Sul. Now, since I was on the NDVI, you can actually see the MODIS-derived NDVI values, and certainly it's below normal in Rio Grande do Sul. But you can now come up to the top here and say, well, show me the precipitation. And what I'll do here is, if you take a look, right now the cumulative precipitation, this is using a data set called CHIRPS. If normal is a little over 800 millimeters since September, they're right now looking at, half of that, just above 400. So the drought issues there are real. We just haven't been hearing a lot about them because much of northern Brazil and central Brazil has been wet. And the total productivity out of this area might be able to outpace the losses in Rio Grande do Sul. What I'm worried about is how wet it's been here. I've now been talking about this for a few weeks. Still, the next 15 days, an extra 2 to 3 inches of rainfall possible in this area compared to normal. And even though we're talking drier conditions coming back into Argentina with very limited chances of widespread rain, we know that the temperatures finally after today are going to cool off across this area. So that's a less of a heat stress metric. So a lot of pieces just to keep an eye on here, but I appreciate your patience, and we'll talk to you again. For those who get my report in the morning, for everybody else, we'll talk on Thursday night. Thanks.